At 5:30 a.m. on a cold February morning in Bakersfield, California, Ezra Goldfield counted the last $572 in his wallet while sitting in his rusted 1998 Chevy pickup outside Riverside County Livestock Auction. At 42, the third-generation almond farmer was about to lose everything his grandfather had built, 2,000 acres of Central Valley farmland that had been in the Goldfield family since 1954. The drought had been merciless for 3 straight years, turning Ezra's once productive almond groves into skeletal monuments to California's changing climate. His wife Maria had moved back to her mother's house in Fresno 2 months ago, taking their twin daughters Sophia and Carmen with her, unable to watch their dreams crumble any longer into dust and unpaid bills. "Ezra, you can't keep doing this to yourself," Maria had said during their last conversation, her voice thick with the exhaustion of fighting a losing battle. "The bank's going to foreclose next month anyway. Why don't you just accept what's happening and come with us?" But Ezra couldn't let go. Not of the land his grandfather Miguel had purchased with money saved from 20 years of backbreaking labor, not of the farmhouse where his daughters had taken their first steps, and certainly not of the last desperate idea that had brought him to this livestock auction on a morning when he should have been accepting defeat. The idea came from his neighbor Joaquin Ramirez, whose small cattle operation had somehow survived the drought that destroyed most crop farming in the valley. "Cattle don't need irrigation like almonds," Joaquin had explained. "Buy some breeding stock, lease grazing rights to other ranchers, and you might generate enough income to keep the bank interested while you transition the land." With $572 representing his family's last liquid assets, scraped together from selling Maria's jewelry, their second truck, and anything else of value, Ezra wasn't exactly positioned to compete for premium livestock. He'd come to the auction hoping to find breeding stock that might represent a chance to generate income from land that was worthless for farming but could still support cattle. The morning auction featured healthy, expensive livestock that serious ranchers bid on with the confidence of people who understood bloodlines, breeding values, and market dynamics. Ezra watched lot after lot sell for $5,000 to $15,000, feeling increasingly out of place in a world where his entire net worth wouldn't cover a single animal's purchase price. It wasn't until the afternoon difficult placement section that Ezra found something approaching his price range. Lot 127 featured a 3-year-old Angus bull named Colossus, who'd been returned by 2 different breeding operations for reasons the auctioneer seemed reluctant to discuss in detail. "Now, folks, this next bull has had some challenges in previous breeding programs," announced Buck Clearwater, the veteran auctioneer whose family had been running livestock sales in Riverside County for 4 decades. "He's healthy according to all veterinary examinations, but he hasn't performed as expected in commercial breeding situations. Starting bid is $2,000. Colossus entered the ring, and Ezra immediately understood the hesitation. Despite impressive size and obvious physical strength, the bull moved with an unusual gait that suggested possible joint issues. More concerning was his behavior. Instead of the confident dominance display typical of breeding bulls, Colossus seemed almost passive, staying close to handlers and showing none of the aggressive posturing that buyers expected from valuable breeding stock. "1,500? Buck tried, scanning the sparse crowd with professional optimism. 1,000? A few cattle dealers discussed the animal among themselves, but their body language suggested skepticism about investing in a bull with documented performance issues. $800? Buck's voice carried the resignation of someone who'd seen too many good animals fail to meet market expectations simply because they didn't conform to conventional standards. Ezra's hand went up before his rational mind could intervene. $500, he called out, his voice carrying across the nearly empty arena. The remaining bidders turned to look at the farmer who'd just offered serious money for an animal that experienced cattlemen were avoiding. $500 represented almost everything Ezra had left in the world, but something about Colossus's quiet dignity reminded him of his own situation, written off by experts but possibly still holding untapped potential. "I have 500, Buck confirmed, looking around hopefully. "Do I hear 600? Silence. Nobody else wanted to risk money on a bull that 2 established operations had already found unsatisfactory. Sold to bidder 89 for $500. As Ezra walked down to complete his paperwork, spending nearly 90% of his remaining cash on an animal he knew nothing about, He felt the familiar combination of terror and determination that had characterized every major decision in his farming career. "You buying this bull for breeding or beef?" asked the registration clerk, a middle-aged woman who'd processed thousands of these transactions. "Honestly, ma'am, I'm not entirely sure yet," Ezra replied, signing documents that committed him to an investment he couldn't afford to lose. But sometimes you have to bet on potential when you can't afford certainty. Looking at Colossus standing patiently in the holding pen, Ezra saw something the experts had missed. Not just a failed breeding bull, but an animal whose quiet strength and unusual behavior might represent opportunities that conventional thinking couldn't recognize. "Come on, boy," Ezra said quietly as he prepared for the drive back to Bakersfield. "Let's go home and see if two underdogs can figure out how to prove everybody wrong." The struggling farmer and the rejected bull were about to discover that sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones that don't fit anyone else's definition of success. If this story of risking everything when you have almost nothing left already has you invested in Ezra and Colossus, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that prove wisdom often comes disguised as desperate gambles. At 3:15 p.m., the drive from Riverside County Livestock Auction back to the Goldfield farm in Bakersfield stretched 47 miles through Central Valley landscape that told the story of California's agricultural crisis. Ezra's livestock trailer swayed gently behind his pickup as Colossus stood quietly inside, and for the first time in months, Ezra felt something that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't despair either. The farm that greeted them looked nothing like the thriving operation Ezra's grandfather had built. Where 2,000 acres of almond trees had once stretched toward the Sierra Nevada mountains, now stood rows of brown, leafless skeletons, victims of a drought that had forced Ezra to choose between saving his trees and saving his marriage. The irrigation systems sat unused, and the once green fields had turned to dust that swirled in the afternoon wind. Joaquin Ramirez was waiting with his livestock trailer when they arrived, having agreed to help Ezra transport and settle his impulsive purchase. At 58, Joaquin had the weathered wisdom of a man who'd survived 3 decades of California farming by adapting when others couldn't, and his expression suggested serious reservations about Ezra's decision. $500 for a bull that 2 breeding operations couldn't use, Joaquin said, shaking his head as they prepared to unload Colossus. "Ezra, I hope you know something the rest of us don't." "I know I'm running out of options," Ezra replied honestly, watching as Colossus stepped carefully from the trailer with the same unusual gait he'd displayed at the auction. "And I know that sometimes the things nobody else wants are the ones with the most potential." What happened next surprised both men. Instead of the typical aggressive territory-marking behavior bulls displayed in new environments, Colossus moved through the temporary pen with calm curiosity, investigating his surroundings without stress or agitation. When Joaquin's teenage son Miguel approached the fence, the bull actually moved closer, showing interest rather than the wariness or hostility they'd expected. "That's not normal bull behavior," Joaquin observed, his skepticism beginning to shift toward professional curiosity. "Most bulls would be pacing, snorting, trying to establish dominance. This one's acting almost gentle." Dr. Elena Clearwater arrived that evening in response to Ezra's call about needing a veterinary evaluation of his investment. At 46, she was the 3rd generation of her family to serve the agricultural community around Bakersfield, and she'd learned to recognize when farmers were making decisions based on desperation rather than good judgment. "Ezra, you spent $500 on a bull without having him examined first?" she asked, though her tone carried more concern than criticism. "That's not like you." "Nothing about my situation is like me anymore," Ezra admitted, watching as Dr. Clearwater began her evaluation. "But there's something different about this animal. I can't put my finger on it, but he's not what everyone thinks he is." Dr. Clearwater's examination took nearly 2 hours and revealed something remarkable. Colossus was in perfect physical health. His unusual gait was actually a result of exceptionally careful movement patterns that suggested high intelligence rather than joint problems. More significantly, his blood work and genetic markers indicated breeding potential far beyond what his previous owners had documented. "Ezra, where exactly did you say this bull came from?" Dr. Clearwater asked, studying her test results with growing amazement. 2 different breeding operations in Nevada couldn't get him to perform. Both said he was useless for commercial breeding. That doesn't make sense. Dr. Clearwater showed Ezra her findings. His hormone levels are perfect, his fertility indicators are off the charts, and his genetic profile suggests he's from premium bloodlines. There's no medical reason this bull couldn't sire exceptional calves. Over the following days, a pattern emerged that would change Ezra's understanding of his impulsive purchase. Colossus showed unusual intelligence in everything he did, learning the farm's routine within hours, responding to verbal commands with remarkable consistency, and most surprisingly, displaying protective behavior toward the smaller animals that shared his temporary pasture. Maria called on Friday evening, her first conversation with Ezra since moving to Fresno, and her voice carried the weary concern of someone who'd watched her husband make too many desperate decisions. "The girls are asking when Daddy's coming to visit," she said carefully. "And honestly, Ezra, so am I. How long are you going to keep fighting for something that's already lost?" "I bought a bull," Ezra said, surprising himself with how the words sounded when spoken aloud. "You bought a what?" "A bull, Colossus, $500 at the livestock auction. Maria, there's something special about this animal. Dr. Clearwater says his genetics are extraordinary, but nobody else could see it." The silence on the other end stretched long enough for Ezra to wonder if the call had dropped. Finally, Maria spoke with the controlled patience she used when their daughters tested her limits. "Ezra, honey, we have $72 left in our checking account. The mortgage payment is due in 2 weeks, and you spent $500 on a bull because you think he's special? I know how it sounds. It sounds like you're having a breakdown. Please come to Fresno. Let's figure this out together instead of you making decisions alone that affect all of us." After Maria hung up, Ezra walked out to check on Colossus in the gathering twilight. The bull was standing at the fence, and when he saw Ezra approaching, he moved closer with the same gentle curiosity he'd shown since arriving. "She thinks I've lost my mind," Ezra said quietly, scratching behind Colossus's ears in a gesture that would have been dangerous with most bulls, but felt completely natural with this one. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I am just a desperate man making desperate choices." Colossus responded with a soft rumble that sounded almost conversational, and for the first time in months, Ezra felt something that resembled peace. Whatever happened with the farm, whatever decisions lay ahead about his marriage and his future, he was no longer facing them completely alone. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor in the form of Dr. Marcus Goldstone, a cattle genetics specialist from UC Davis who'd driven down from Sacramento after hearing about Ezra's purchase through the agricultural community's informal network. "Mr. Goldfield, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced," Dr. Goldstone said, his attention immediately focused on Colossus with the intensity of someone who spent his career studying exceptional animals. "I've been following the bloodline research on Angus cattle for 15 years, and if my information is correct, you may have purchased something extraordinary." As Dr. Goldstone began explaining what he suspected about Colossus's genetic heritage, Ezra realized that his desperate $500 gamble might have been the smartest investment of his life, if he could figure out how to capitalize on potential that everyone else had somehow missed. The rejected bull was about to reveal secrets that would challenge everything the breeding industry thought it knew about value, performance, and the kind of intelligence that couldn't be measured by conventional standards. At 9:30 a.m. the following Tuesday, Dr. Marcus Goldstone's return to the Goldfield farm came with equipment that transformed Ezra's dusty yard into a makeshift genetics laboratory. The UC Davis specialist had spent the weekend analyzing Colossus's blood samples, and his findings were significant enough to warrant a comprehensive evaluation that could rewrite what the agricultural world understood about hidden genetic treasures. "Ezra, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, Dr. Goldstone said, setting up his portable DNA analysis equipment, while Colossus watched with the calm intelligence that had become his trademark. "Your $500 bull is carrying genetic markers from the Blackwood Emperor bloodline, animals that haven't been seen in commercial breeding for over 30 years. Ezra had enough farming experience to recognize important names in livestock breeding, and Blackwood Emperor was legendary. The bull had sired championship cattle worth millions before disappearing from breeding records in the early 1990s, leaving behind a legacy of exceptional offspring that commanded premium prices at auction." "How is that possible?" Ezra asked, watching Dr. Goldstone collect tissue samples from Colossus with the reverence of someone handling priceless artifacts. "If he's carrying those genetics, why couldn't the previous owners get him to breed successfully?" "That's where this gets interesting," Dr. Goldstone replied, his scientific excitement barely contained. Colossus isn't just carrying Blackwood Emperor genetics, he's carrying them in a recessive pattern that only expresses under specific environmental and social conditions. The previous owners tried to force breeding in high-stress commercial operations, but this bull needs calm, natural conditions to perform. The implications began crystallizing for Ezra as Dr. Goldstone explained the science behind what they were discovering. Colossus's unusual behavior wasn't a defect. It was highly evolved intelligence that made him extremely sensitive to stress, environmental factors, and social dynamics. In typical commercial breeding operations, these traits made him appear dysfunctional. In the right environment, they could make him extraordinarily valuable. What kind of valuable are we talking about? Ezra asked, afraid to hope, but unable to ignore the possibility that his desperate gamble might represent salvation rather than folly. If I'm right about his genetic profile, Colossus could sire calves worth $50,000 to $100,000 each at auction. We're potentially looking at one of the most genetically significant bulls born in the past quarter century. That afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors as word spread through California's agricultural community about the genetic discovery happening on a failing almond farm in Bakersfield. Cattle breeders, genetics researchers, and livestock investors arrived with offers that escalated from thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars for breeding rights to Colossus. The most serious offer came from Sterling Blackwater, owner of prestigious Valley Ranch, who'd built a fortune identifying and developing exceptional breeding stock. His proposal was straightforward: $500,000 cash for full ownership of Colossus, plus a management contract that would pay Ezra $100,000 annually to oversee the bull's breeding program. Mr. Goldfield, you're looking at financial security for life, Sterling explained, his briefcase full of contracts and certified checks. This bull could generate millions in breeding fees over his lifetime, and you'd be guaranteed a substantial annual income regardless of market conditions. Ezra found himself holding documents that represented more money than his family had ever dreamed of possessing. The offers would save the farm, reunite his family, and provide security for his daughter's education. Everything he'd been fighting to preserve through 3 years of agricultural disaster. But that evening, as he sat with Colossus in the gathering twilight, Ezra realized the decision wasn't as simple as accepting the highest bid. The bull who'd been rejected by everyone else had chosen to trust him, and that trust had revealed secrets that could transform both their lives. Walking away now would mean abandoning the partnership that had made the discovery possible. Maria arrived unexpectedly that night, driving down from Fresno after hearing rumors about offers being made for Ezra's bull. She found him in the barn, sitting on a hay bale, while Colossus stood nearby with the peaceful contentment that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. "The girls are asleep in the truck," Maria said quietly, settling beside her husband for their first real conversation since she'd moved out. "I came because I needed to see this animal that's apparently worth more than our entire farm. He's not just worth money, Maria. I know this sounds crazy, but he chose me. Out of everyone at that auction, everyone who could have helped him, he waited for someone who would see what he really was instead of what everyone expected him to be." Maria studied Colossus with the practical eye that had made her an excellent partner in their farming operation before the drought destroyed everything they'd built together. "He does seem different from other bulls, calmer, more aware. Dr. Goldstone says his intelligence is off the charts. He's not just a breeding bull, he's a genetic treasure that could revolutionize how we understand cattle development. And the offers? Enough to save the farm, pay off all our debts, and set up college funds for the girls. Sterling Blackwater wants to buy him outright for $500,000, plus guarantee me a 6-figure annual salary." Maria was quiet for a long time, watching as Colossus moved closer to where they sat, positioning himself where he could keep both humans in sight while remaining relaxed and non-threatening. "What does your heart tell you to do?" she asked finally. Ezra looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time in months, and saw the same woman who'd believed in his farming dreams when everyone else thought he was crazy to try growing almonds in changing climate conditions. "My heart says that Colossus and I found each other for a reason. That maybe the best way to honor what we've discovered isn't to sell it to the highest bidder, but to prove that patient partnership can achieve more than commercial exploitation. And if you're wrong, If we lose everything because you turned down guaranteed money for an uncertain future. Ezra reached for Maria's hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of years spent working beside him in fields and orchards that no longer existed. Then we'll lose it together as a family, instead of me losing it alone because I was too scared to trust what I'd found. As they sat in the barn with Colossus standing guard over their reunion, all three understood that the decision ahead would determine not just their financial future, but whether they could build something extraordinary from the ashes of everything they'd lost. The rejected bull had revealed his secrets. Now it was time to discover whether the humans who'd found him had the courage to bet their future on the kind of partnership that couldn't be measured in dollars, but might be worth more than any amount of money. At 6:45 a.m. on a crisp March morning, Ezra stood in his kitchen holding Sterling Blackwater's certified check for $500,000 while watching his daughters Sophia and Carmen feed Colossus through the pasture fence. The girls had returned home the night before, and their laughter as they interacted with the gentle giant reminded Ezra of why he'd started farming in the first place. To build something meaningful for the people he loved. The check represented everything his family needed: mortgage payments, debt relief, college funds, and financial security that would last for decades. But attached to it was a contract that would transfer Colossus to prestigious Valley Ranch within 48 hours, ending the partnership that had already transformed both man and bull in ways that transcended monetary value. "Daddy, why does Colossus follow you everywhere?" 8-year-old Sophia asked as she climbed onto the fence to get a better view of the bull who'd become her favorite part of coming home. "Miguel Ramirez says bulls are supposed to be scary, but Colossus acts like a big dog." "Because he trusts me, Mika," Ezra replied, watching as Colossus gently nuzzled Carmen's outstretched hand. "And sometimes trust is more valuable than anything money can buy." Maria emerged from the house with coffee and the morning newspapers, which had been full of stories about the miracle bull of Bakersfield since Dr. Goldstone's genetic discoveries became public knowledge. Agricultural journalists from across the country were calling Colossus the most significant breeding discovery in decades, and the phone had been ringing nonstop with offers from investors and breeding operations. "Sterling Blackwater called again this morning," Maria said, settling beside Ezra on the porch steps. "He's increasing his offer to $750,000, but only if we sign today. Says other investors are starting to circle, and he wants to close the deal before this turns into a bidding war." The escalating offers should have made the decision easier, but Ezra found himself increasingly reluctant to sign contracts that would separate him from Colossus. The bull had revealed his genetic secrets because of the trust and patient care he'd received at the Goldfield farm. Commercial breeding operations, no matter how well-intentioned, operated on timelines and productivity metrics that had already failed to unlock Colossus's potential. Dr. Elena Clearwater arrived that afternoon with test results that would complicate Ezra's decision even further. Her follow-up examinations had revealed something that genetics testing couldn't capture. Colossus's breeding success was directly linked to his emotional state and environmental conditions. "Ezra, I've been studying the data from his previous breeding attempts," she explained, spreading veterinary reports across the kitchen table. At both Nevada operations, Colossus's hormone levels and fertility markers dropped dramatically within weeks of arrival. But here, in this environment, his biological indicators are optimal. What does that mean practically? It means this bull's extraordinary genetics only express fully when he's in a low-stress environment with handlers he trusts. Take him to a commercial facility, and you might get a valuable bull. Keep him here, and you potentially have access to the most genetically significant breeding animal of our generation. That evening, Joaquin Ramirez stopped by with news that would force Ezra to confront the reality of his situation. Word about Colossus had reached the bank holding the mortgage on the Goldfield farm, and loan officers were beginning to view the bull as a liquid asset that could be used to satisfy outstanding debts. "They're not going to wait much longer for you to make a decision," Joaquin warned, his weathered face showing the concern of someone who'd watched too many family farms disappear during difficult times. "If you don't sell Colossus voluntarily, they might force a sale to recover their losses. Can they do that legally? With the amount you owe and the publicity about this bull's value? Their lawyers will find a way. Ezra, you need to either take one of these offers or come up with an alternative that generates immediate income." That night, as Ezra walked through the almond groves that had once been his pride and now stood as monuments to dreams deferred, he realized that keeping Colossus meant more than just turning down guaranteed money. It meant betting everything on an unproven business model that could either save his family or destroy them completely. The alternative he'd been considering was as risky as it was revolutionary, establishing the Goldfield Genetics Center, a boutique breeding operation that would capitalize on Colossus's unique requirements by offering personalized breeding services for premium clients. Instead of selling the bull, Ezra would retain ownership while charging substantial fees for breeding rights and genetic services. Maria found him in the barn at midnight, sitting with Colossus in the peaceful quiet that had become their evening routine. The bull's calm presence had a meditative quality that helped Ezra think through complex problems without the pressure of external voices and conflicting advice. "I've been looking at the numbers," Maria said, settling beside her husband with the financial projections they'd been working on together. "If Colossus can sire even 10 calves annually at premium prices, we'd generate more income than any of the buyout offers. But Ezra, the risk..." "I know the risk. If I'm wrong about his potential, if the genetics don't translate to valuable offspring, if the market changes, we lose everything." "And if you're right?" Ezra looked at Colossus, who'd positioned himself close enough to sense their conversation while maintaining the respectful distance that characterized all his interactions. "If I'm right, we build something extraordinary, not just financially, but as a family. The girls grow up understanding that sometimes the most valuable things can't be bought or sold. They have to be nurtured and protected." At 11:30 p.m., Maria made the decision that would define their future. She took Sterling Blackwater's check, walked to the fireplace, and held it over the flames until Ezra understood what she was offering. "We came this far together," she said quietly. "If we're going to risk everything on a bull in a dream, at least we'll do it as a family." As the check burned, transforming guaranteed security into smoke and ashes, Ezra realized that his wife had just made the ultimate statement of faith, not just in Colossus's genetic potential, but in their ability to build something meaningful from the ruins of everything they'd lost. The rejected bull had revealed his secrets. Now it remained to be seen whether the family who'd chosen to trust him could transform those secrets into the kind of success that couldn't be measured solely in dollars, but in the legacy they'd leave for their daughters and the agricultural community that had watched their desperate gamble with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. The biggest risk of their lives was about to begin, with everything they valued hanging in the balance and only their faith in each other, and in a gentle giant who'd chosen to trust them, standing between salvation and complete ruin. At dawn on October 15th, 18 months after burning Sterling Blackwater's check, Ezra Goldfield stood in the main pasture of what was now the internationally renowned Goldfield Genetics Center, watching his daughters play with a group of Colossus's offspring whose combined value exceeded $3.2 million. The transformation had been nothing short of miraculous. Colossus's first breeding season had produced 12 calves, each carrying the legendary Blackwood Emperor genetics that made them instantly sought after by premium breeders worldwide. The second season yielded 15 more, with pre-orders coming from as far away as Japan and Australia for animals that wouldn't be weaned for another 6 months. "Daddy, look how gentle Titan is with the new babies," Sophia called out, watching as one of Colossus's yearling sons carefully moved around smaller calves with the same intelligent consideration that characterized his father's behavior. The success had exceeded every projection Ezra and Maria had dared to make during those terrifying early months when they'd mortgaged their future on a bull's unproven potential. Breeding fees alone were generating over $2 million annually, and the waiting list for Colossus's services now extended 3 years into the future. Dr. Marcus Goldstone had become a regular consultant, documenting the genetic phenomenon occurring at the small Central Valley farm. His research papers about Colossus's unique breeding success had revolutionized understanding of how environmental factors influenced genetic expression in livestock. "What you've achieved here challenges everything we thought we knew about maximizing breeding potential," he told the International Agricultural Symposium that had gathered at the farm that morning. "The Goldfield model proves that patient, individualized care can unlock genetic treasures that commercial operations miss entirely." But the morning's most significant visitor was Sterling Blackwater, whose failed attempt to purchase Colossus had become a cautionary tale in breeding circles about recognizing value beyond conventional measurements. His current offer, $5 million for a 50% partnership in the Goldfield operation, represented vindication for every risk Ezra had taken. I'll admit I underestimated what you were building here, Sterling said, watching Colossus interact with his offspring in the main pasture. This isn't just breeding. It's a complete paradigm shift in how we approach genetic development. Maria emerged from the renovated farmhouse, now headquarters for an operation that employed 12 full-time staff and hosted researchers from major universities. The financial success had allowed them to restore the almond groves using drought-resistant varieties, creating a diversified agricultural business that honored both tradition and innovation. The accountants finished the annual reports, she told Ezra, her smile carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd watched desperate faith transform into extraordinary success. Between breeding fees, genetic licensing, and the consulting contracts, we cleared $4.8 million this year. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Success had brought scrutiny from competitors, regulatory agencies, and media outlets, questioning how a failing farmer had suddenly become one of the most influential figures in American agriculture. But every investigation had confirmed what Ezra had discovered that first night in the barn. Colossus's success came from trust, patience, and the kind of partnership that couldn't be replicated through conventional business models. At sunset, as the visiting dignitaries departed and the farm settled into evening quiet, Ezra found himself in the familiar spot where everything had begun, sitting with Colossus in the peaceful calm that had defined their relationship from the beginning. "You know, old friend," Ezra said, scratching behind the bull's ears while watching his daughters chase fireflies in the gathering twilight, "everyone wants to know the secret of what we've built here." Colossus responded with the soft rumble that had become their private language, and Ezra realized that the secret wasn't complex genetic science or revolutionary breeding techniques. It was the simple recognition that sometimes the most valuable things come disguised as problems nobody else wants to solve. Carmen ran over with a handful of wildflowers she'd picked for her bull, and Colossus lowered his massive head to accept the gift with the gentle dignity that had made him beloved by everyone who met him. "Daddy, are we rich now?" she asked, settling between her father and the bull who'd transformed their family's destiny. "We're blessed, mija," Ezra replied, looking around at the farm that had been saved, the family that had been reunited, and the future that stretched ahead filled with possibilities they'd never dared imagine. "We found something special when everyone else had given up, and we had the courage to believe in it." As stars appeared over the Central Valley, Ezra understood that their success measured more than financial achievement. They'd proven that authentic partnerships, built on trust, patience, and mutual respect, could overcome any obstacle and create value that transcended market calculations. The useless, rejected bull had indeed made him a millionaire, but more importantly, Colossus had taught the Goldfield family that the most extraordinary fortunes are built not by exploiting opportunities, but by nurturing relationships that others consider worthless until someone with vision recognizes their true potential. The miracle of Bakersfield would inspire agricultural innovation for generations, but at its heart remained a simple truth. Sometimes the most valuable investments are the ones that everyone else is afraid to make. In this story of vision, courage, and the power of authentic partnership, a desperate farmer and a misunderstood bull prove that the greatest fortunes are built not by following conventional wisdom, but by having the courage to recognize extraordinary potential hiding in plain sight. Poor farmer bought the most useless, rejected bull at the auction. The animal made him a millionaire.